Good afternoon, everyone. Please use the chat and introduce yourself, saying your name, where you're from, and which languages do you teach. Hi, everyone. As I said, for those just joining in, please feel free to use the chat, introducing yourself, saying your name, where you are, and which languages do you teach. Hi, Heidi. Thank you for being the first one, starting us off. We'll start in less than a minute. Hi, Charlie. Ben ready. Hi, Miriam. Hi, Vicky. Teaching French and maths, so that's interesting. Yeah, if you've just joined us, please make sure that you introduce yourself in the chat, saying your name, where you teach, and maybe which languages do you teach as well. Hi, everyone. Oh, someone joining us from Spain. That's lovely. I'll just start sharing my screen, and then we'll make a start. Someone from Switzerland as well. Hi, Laetitia. Teaching French and German. Nice to see you all. We'll just make a start really shortly. I'll just give a few more seconds, and we'll start. Feel free to use the Q&A if you've got any questions during the session, and I'll make sure that I'll answer those questions right at the end. The reason why I'm not asking you to put questions in the chat is that then sometimes there are so many comments, I don't want to miss any of your questions. So as I said, any questions, please put them on the Q&A. But please use the chat during the session to interact or for any comments that you might have. Without any ado, it's 2:30, so we'll start this session. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my session. So my session this afternoon is about feedback and not marking. So I'm Jennifer. I teach in a secondary school in East Lancashire, in the northwest of England, and I teach French and Spanish, and I'm a French native speaker. Before starting, just talking about the Association for Language Learning. I am a very proud member of the association. It's a great association with so much support. We are a very nice community. So if you are not a member yet, I would strongly advise you to become one. So we could spend a full day talking about feedback. So here I'm only going to mention some aspects that you should consider, and giving you as well some very practical ideas to go with it. But I wanted to start with that quote. Dylan Wiliam, if you don't know, he is the guru for formative assessment and feedback. And as he reminds us, what matters is what learners do with it, so what they do with the feedback, and that the most important decisions taken in classroom are not taken by the teachers, but rather by the learners. So it's fair to say that when it comes to feedback, teachers must think about what is most effective in terms of improving the work of the students. And effective feedback for learning will present actually in a range of ways. But that is not to say that one method is the right way to guide our students to become better learners, because actually there are several factors will likely be considered when choosing the most appropriate feedback method. But as teachers, we decide on the best way in response to the work produced, and also depending on the specific circumstances as they arise in the classroom. But it's all about ensuring that pupils understand the value of feedback that the purpose has been shared with them, and that they have the tools and the understanding to engage with the feedback and therefore improve. So I would strongly advise you to read the summary of recommendations published by the EEF about teacher feedback. The summary is, it's a A3 piece of paper, and it does summarize the 6 strategies that are really useful. So the EEF states that careless mistakes should be marked differently to errors resulting from misunderstanding. The latter may be best addressed by providing hints or questions which lead pupils to underlying principles, the former by simply marking the mistake as incorrect without giving the right way. So, I like using the correct and perfect strategy. I don't know if you are aware of that strategy, but that is a strategy that I saw being presented at one of the Pixel conferences ages ago. And what it does, so the correct and the perfect. So the correct, it's something that the pupils can correct themselves without you giving them the answer. Okay, so like for example, it might be if they've said j'habite à Preston and didn't put that capital a P on Preston. Well, that's a mistake. They can correct themselves. You don't need to correct it yourself. So you might just circle it. Or for example, if they say, you know, I don't know, mes parents sont amusants. Mes parents sont amusants, and they forget to put the S at the end of the adjective because it's plural. But you know that they actually know that rule, so just circle it, and they have to find the mistake themselves. It's something that is easy for them to correct. So that's the correct strategy. And the perfect is really something that the pupils need to improve. They need to improve, for example, a sentence, or they need to improve a part of their paragraph. And here you will have to give them some prompt for them to be able to do. But it's a strategy, the correct and perfect from Pixel is a strategy that works really well. So what is feedback? Well, the feedback has the following main roles. It's to show students what they need to aim for, to set them off, and then to keep them learning on track, to let them know what they have got there, and to point them in the direction of their next goal. So it is a reciprocal process between the teacher and the students, as you can see from the picture on the slide that was taken from Making Every MFL Lesson Count. So the information we receive back from students through, like for example, through quizzing, through low-stake testing, through assessment, or just through you know, their response to feedback, should inform our approach to teaching. And that's what Dylan Wiliam refers as responsive teaching. So what we are getting from the pupils, then that should inform what we are going to do, you know, to do with it. So I wanted to talk about what is ineffective feedback, okay? Because some feedback can actually be very ineffective when, for example, marking is the principal or only is the principal or the only method. We should not only be using marking. Marking is not the only thing to provide feedback for our pupils. Then, if you are using an universal feedback stamp to say like verbal feedback has been given, you know, because some teachers are using those stamps. If you are using that stamp, my question to you is like, who are you using that stamp for? Because one, it's never going to help to help the pupils remember what they've been, you know, what you said to them. And if you've done it for your leadership team, well, no, that is not, you know, the right thing to do. So you do not need to put a stamp saying verbal feedback has been, you know, has been given. Ineffective feedback can also be when it's like too vague or too general. Like, for example, if you say like include more detail, well, that might be just too vague. What exactly do you want them to include? If feedback are also ineffective when it does concentrate on the person rather than the piece of work, Or if you give feedback, but you don't give them the time to act on it, then you will have wasted your time. So always make sure that when you give feedback, the pupils got the opportunity to act on that. And also, sometimes you see that too much feedback are being given at once, and therefore the pupils can't improve. So let's look at some strategies that can help reduce teacher workload, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. So the first strategy is immediate feedback. So what am I talking about when I talk about immediate feedback delivered in a lesson? Well, that can be done with a visualizer. It could be when you redirect any errors, or when you ask, some of your pupils to develop their answer. It can be done, with your class to focus on the general misunderstanding, or it could be when, you are exploring, how to improve. The teacher can model alternative, approaches, or you can suggest, a range of answers, or you might just illustrate, common errors. So that's the immediate feedback that happens in the classroom all the time. But when we ask close questions, or when we correct what pupils have just said, it is easy to give immediate feedback. And the Modern Foreign Languages Pedagogy Review says that error correction in both spoken and written language is most powerful when it can be done immediately. So when it's the thing that you are corrected as soon as it is happening in the classroom, because the pupils got, it's there, it's instant. Another strategy that can help reduce teacher workload is the live marking and the all class feedback. But won't say too much about it now, because I've got some slides later on about that. Verbal feedback, well, we give feedback to our pupils all the time and throughout all our lessons, because we correct what pupils say, we question them about the grammar, we ask them to extend their answers, etc. But as I said before, we do not need that verbal feedback stamp, because if you use one, well, keep asking yourself, who am I using that for? And verbal feedback could focus on a number of aspects. So, for example, to encourage your students to think about high-level vocabulary in terms of the content, to draw attention to any maybe inaccuracies in spelling or in the grammar, or it can be used to develop thinking about high-quality functional use of language, such as, for example, extended justification of opinions, for example, or to induce thinking on the structure of responses. But what is key with verbal feedback, or actually with any type of feedback, is to then ensure we revisit what people struggle with to make sure that they won't do that same mistake over time. So for example, if it was a mistake about adjectival agreement, because they keep making those mistakes all the time, I would then ask my pupils so like for example, someone has made a mistake orally, on adjectival agreement, okay? So it might be on one question to one pupils. What I might do, because I know it's also something that the pupils struggle with, is then I might ask, everyone in the class to get their mini whiteboards, and we will do some practice. Okay, we will do some practice on adjectival agreement. But then later on, I will also include it, for example, in my knowledge retrieval, grade, or in my do now activities. So even if in that then specific lesson later on, I'm not going to, cover adjectival agreement, I'm still revisiting that in my do nows. So then it's always revisited and repeated. So over time, the pupils are not making those mistakes. Marking codes could also help reduce, teacher workload. So you could have, for example, WO for word order, or you could have SP for spelling, for things that, the pupils can correct themselves, things that you're not going to correct, yourself, but that the pupils will do. Or if, for example, if in a paragraph, people have misspelled, for example, say, it is, they might have put the apostrophe, but then maybe not leaving a space between the C and the E. Well, if they've made that mistake more than once, well, correct it once, and then all the other times highlight it, and then the pupils can correct it themselves. You don't need to correct it, every single time. Making sure as well that, something that can help reduce teacher workloads, it's making sure that the ownership is on the students. So ensuring that your pupils are actually doing more work than us teachers. And I think also something that could really help is the proofreading. So people checking their work before submission. However, I really think it's important that you train your pupils to proofread because it's not something that they find, easy. So in terms of strategies, I use my visualizer all the time to demonstrate, live feedback. So we know how important modeling is. Something that can be done is to mark 2 or 3 books with the class using the visualizer and talking through your marking by mentioning the success criteria, by asking the class questions about maybe some mistakes that have been made. Then using the mark scheme and going through the thought process is very powerful because then the pupils understand how you mark and what criteria you are using. And when you do that with a class, you'll see that when you do it using the visualizer, then pupils start correcting their own work because they recognize some of the mistakes that have been made by their peers, but actually they've got exactly the same one in their own books. And you will see that they start, correcting those mistakes themselves. Another strategy that I use for feedback is the 5 R's. I don't know if you are familiar with this strategy or not, but the 5 R's that Tom Sherrington explained in his blog, and I have put on the slide the title of his blog, and that Catherine Lloyden has illustrated, as you can see on the screen. So it is 5 different things that can be done. So what I'll do is that I'll go through every single one and I'll give you some example of what I do in my lesson. So the first one is about redrafting and redoing. So it might be like to redraft this paragraph or redo this piece of work or this, couple of sentences by adding, for example, a justification to your main points or by adding a connective, like, for example, par contre, par conséquent, and things like that. The second one, the rehearse or repeat. So in MFL, you could practice, for example, writing certain type of sentences. So like, for example, if all the past tense in the paragraph has been done not accurately by your pupil, well, you might correct it, remind them of the rule, and then what you could ask that pupils to do is actually rehearse, their use of past tense by rewriting those sentences in the past. Number 3, revisit and respond. So, it's where you will actually, ask some questions, as a feedback, and the pupils, will answer those questions. Like, for example, recently in my year 10, one of my pupils, Talan, has put mes parents est, I can't remember which adjective is used. So he's used is instead of are. So use est instead of sont. Okay. So one of the questions that I've put for him to do is like, why do you need to use sont with mes parents and not est? And I knew he would know the answer to that. So then he's put, well, because sont means are and est means is. So with my parents being plural, I had to use, sont. But it was like, I was making him think about the mistakes that he's made, because sometimes if you just correct the mistake, they don't even look at what you've corrected. So sometimes you just need to ask them questions on something really important that, is going to make them think. Number 4, relearn and retest. So what I do with this one is that then I will give a list of vocab that pupils must learn and making sure that they self-quiz themselves. And the last one, the rehearse and the record, it's the one that I did find really difficult, for me to use. And now I find a way that works really well. And this one, so I use this one in MFL where I identified for the students what they've struggled with, and ask the pupils to look at the work of other students who did really well on that specific point, and then to make some notes of their finding. So I'm only using this one with my Key Stage 4 classes because it's smaller groups, so it's easier for the pupils to go around and to check the work of other pupils. Another strategy could be to make use of technology tools and voice memos to give oral feedback, and it's very easy to do. I've mentioned in my previous session that I use Vocaroo a lot, and as I said, it's dead easy. You've got that red recording button, and you just click on it. You can leave, verbal feedback. Then you click on it again when you're finished. And as you can see on the screen, that will give you a link. So I give that link, I send it on Teams, on Microsoft Teams to my pupils, but I also download the QR code where it says QR code. And then the pupils, in my year 10 and my year 11, they stick that, and then they can refer back to it, when needed. And again, I also make my pupils, use Vocaroo when I want them to do a piece of, speaking. But the way I will give, verbal feedback here, it might be, for example, it will be personalized. So it will be like maybe on some pronunciation mistakes that they might have made, or it could be like, for example, on the quality of their answer, what they've included, what, they need to improve on. Okay, all class feedback, it's also a very useful feedback strategy that you can use. And, when we mark books, we could easily end up correcting 20 times, if not more, the same mistake. But then, why are we wasting time correcting that same mistake in so many different books when we could use all class feedback? So there are a range of advantages, as it actually, when we use all class feedback, it does reinforce as well the idea that there may be like many pupils experiencing the same problem. So as a pupil, it's not only you getting that, wrong, that others are also getting that wrong. And it also gives almost like a greater scope to explain and expand on comments. And it could help as well comparing, alternative approaches and answers, and also could help you focus on common misconceptions or common errors. So there's a lot of different templates that you can use or adapt for your own classes. Here is just an example that I use from Impact Wells that I personally like. So the way I will do it is that I will get, so like for example, I've done it recently with my year 7 French class. I've got 28 pupils in my year 7 French class. So what I do is that I got their 28 books. I've just opened them. I looked at them. And when I was looking at them, I also had my PowerPoint on with my all class feedback form, just like this one. And as I was looking through the books, I was making notes on my PowerPoint. And I was just in their book, either like circling things or putting a cross or something. So the pupils knew that they had to correct certain mistake. And again, it means that I was able to do that very, very quickly. And actually, it was more powerful because then the pupils ended up doing more work, and they also then had the time to think about the mistakes that they've made. This is an activity from Jane Bassnett that you can follow on X, and it's called Feedback on Errors. And I absolutely love this feedback strategy, and I use it very regularly. This one, it's an example that I've used recently with my year 10 class. So as you can see in the first column, I have put the common mistakes that the class has made. So you put the different misconception. Then the second column is for the explanation of the problem or the explanation of the grammar rule. So you will do that as a class with your pupils, okay? And the last column, the pupils individually, they will have to write the correct answer. So I've looked at all the books, I've looked at all, their paragraph, made some notes on that form. Then back in the classroom, we did the second column together, explaining, I was asking questions where, je pense mon frère, what's missing here? Oh, the que, the that is missing. Okay, And then we make the link between English. In English, you can say, I think my brother is annoying. But in French, you have to use, I think, that my brother is annoying. So we remind each other of the rule. And then they correct, they write themselves, you know, the correction or the, you know, the example themselves. And that's working really, really well. We know that some pieces of work, they do require written feedback. I am not saying that you should never be marking any piece of work. And we know that sometimes we need to give that written feedback. But it's important to keep all written feedback focused on the success criteria, because I think it's very easy otherwise to just put so many different things. But again, you know, it's going to be very challenging for our learners to know what the priority is. So if you ask a question part of your feedback, well, make sure it creates thinking and that it will allow the students to make progress to the next level. Written feedback can also improve, you know, pupil attainment. However, we do need to consider when the written feedback is going to happen in order to have the most impact. We also need to think about how much or actually how little is useful in order to be effective, because we know that if we give too much feedback, it may be overwhelming or maybe as well demotivating. And of course, we need to think about what it is going to focus on. So what is the most effective in terms of improving the work of our students? I absolutely love using the 20 keys for feedback. So Elena Diaz, she is the expert on the 20 keys. If you do not know about the 20 keys, I highly recommend you to look at Elena Diaz's blog. She explained everything about the 20 keys. You can find the 20 keys in German, French, and Spanish. Elena Diaz is originally, well, she's teaching mainly Spanish, so all the resources are in Spanish, but they've been done in French and in German as well. And those 20 keys remind students about what the teacher is looking for, what the teacher is looking for before or while they are producing their work. So the pupils get that before they do, you know, their piece of work. And it's so easy to use. And now I mark paragraphs so quickly. I absolutely love it. So what I do, I have highlighters. I have a green and a pink highlighter. And we are highlighting pink all the good things. But also, can you see the 20 keys where it says qualifiers, adverbs, connectives, comparison? So for example, if my year 10 pupil has put, you know, aussi, mais, cependant, par contre, loads and loads of connectives, you know, I might just put in green connectives. If they used, you know, qualifiers, adverbs, I will put that in green. For example, if they have not used any idioms or if they've not used any future, I might put that in pink for something that they need to do after. But as I said, I mean, you know, Elena is spending like, you know, she's done a wonderful webinars about the 20 keys, and you can access them on your, you know, on the blog to explain how it works. But I highly recommend you to, you know, to have a look at that. Using mini whiteboards in the classroom is a great tool for formative assessment, as we all know, and therefore help us to give a feedback instantly because we know as well, we get the feedback as well, how well the class, you know and what they've understood on, you know, the specific aspect of language that you are teaching. So you can use it to practice any type of grammar, whether it is like conjugating, or whether it is like, for example, adjectival agreement, and so on. But if a number of students have got the answer wrong, then use this feedback responsively by reteaching the element in question. So use mini whiteboard as well to retest pupils on something they struggled previously. So it's key to give pupils opportunity to practice on what they struggle, and not only straight away, but also later on. So again, you might want then to reuse some aspect that they struggle with in you know, a future lesson. Thinking on when giving feedback on pronunciation is important. So I mentioned before using technologies such as Vocaro, but we also give feedback on pronunciation in every lesson when pupils answer in the target language. So it's important to think about how we do that. So for example, if students give an extended answer, I think it's more useful to wait until the end of the answer to correct any problems with pronunciation, so the flow of the student is not broken. I also make the whole class repeat the words of the phonics that have not been said properly, so that it's not picking on that specific pupil that is contributing, but it's making sure that we all repeat then what has not been said. So it's not picking on one kid. We are all, working on it. I also plan a lot of pair work activities in my lessons, so I make sure that I circulate the room. And again, if I hear any words that are not pronounced properly, then I will make sure that I will repeat those words with the class, and ensure that then we use those words in future lessons to see then pupils then can say it right, afterward. When pupils complete a piece of work in their book, or even, just on their mini whiteboards, I use, I walk around the room and I put a dot next to something that I want the pupils to look at again. So for example, if a spelling mistake has been done and I know that they've got that vocabulary in their books, or if I know, again, it could be a spelling mistake, or it can be like a conjugation a problem, or it can be the word order. So I'll just put a dot next to something that is not right. But we'll also put a cross when pupils have forgotten a verb in their sentence. So for example, lots of my pupils are writing like, j'adore jouer au foot parce que intéressant. So I love playing football because interesting, without saying it, because it is interesting. So if they've missed that it is, I'm just putting a cross where the it is should be in the sentence, and the pupils have to reread their sentence. And I mean, every single time without fail, they know straight away. They know straight away that it is, say or S in Spanish that they've missed. So again, I'm not giving them the answer. I'm just guiding them back where the problem is. So I really like using that technique. It's called Beat the Blues. But Beat the Blues is only with the blue dot. But I've added the cross because I thought it was appropriate in our language lesson. But by doing that, pupils have to think about the nature of the mistake. Have I spelled the word incorrectly? Is it the ending? Is it the word order? Should I have used a different tense? So it's also that thinking that is quite important. I will also use a checklist in assisting, the students with the process of reviewing and editing their own work prior to handing it in. So as I said at the beginning of the session, proofreading is a difficult skill for pupils, and we need to train them to be able to, to do it well. So using checklist might actually guide them. And this is an example on the screen of one that I use, at Key Stage 4. But like everything, this is used to guide pupils, and like all the scaffolds that you might give, we need to gradually remove them as our students progress, on their journey. Students want, I think we need to remember as well that when we spend time giving feedback to pupils, whether it's in their book, whether it's orally in the lesson, whether it's instant, whether it's delayed, and they will get the feedback in the next lesson, I think it's really important that we need to remember that our students won't benefit from our feedback if we don't give them the time to respond to it. So make sure that you use, DIRT or DIT time. So DIRT stands for Dedicated Improvement and Reflection Time. I know that some schools, they don't call it DIRT, they call it DIT. Whatever, it doesn't matter the name you are using. What is important is that you spend time next lesson for the student to act on the feedback that you have given them. And it is an essential component of effective feedback, whether it is a question of a few minutes to reflect on their performance, on the work that they've done, or whether it's going to be like a low stake, a retrieval quiz, or a formal full lesson that you might spend feeding back on a writing assessment. But doesn't really matter what it is, but it's just making sure that time is being given so that the pupils can act on that feedback. I mean, I know that a lot of schools are asking the pupils to complete their dirt and DIT in a different color pen. Can I just remind everyone that the color of the pen really doesn't matter? The reason why most schools are doing it in a different color, we do it in a different color in my school, is that so that we can see that pupils have actually responded to, you know, to it. And again, it's you could ask pupils to do loads of different things. So like, for example, in languages, I ask my pupils sometimes to copy some words 3 times that we've not spelled right, or to correct something that I've, you know, circled. So they have to find the answer to it, because I know, for example, they might have the vocabulary in their book, or, you know, I know they will find the answer, you know, in their book. Or if I did ask them some questions, I want them to answer those questions. Or you can ask, for example, students sometimes when they've not covered all the bullet points at Key Stage 4, well, I will ask them to, you know, write those sentences during their DIT time. Or it could be to ask them to add some link words, opinions, or whatever it might be. The last thing that I've put is a yellow box. I don't know if you know the technique of the yellow box that I use with a highlighter, is that sometimes, you know, the pupils, especially, you know, at Key Stage 4, they might not have covered every single aspect of the task, or their answer is way too short. But then I remember when I started teaching, I used to say to some of my people, oh, you need to extend your paragraph here and add, you know, a bit more details. But then they would literally, some of them would literally write one more sentence. And then I will tell them off for like only writing one sentence and say, well, miss, you have asked me to write more detail. I have written more details, which actually, technically speaking, is just the way I said it was not right. So now what I do when I mark and when I know that my pupils need to, you know, add you know, if their sentences in the past tense, or if they've not covered one of the bullet points that they need to write about, I draw a yellow box in their books. And the size of the box will vary depending on how much I want to write. But then during their DIT or DIRT time, they have to fill in the box. So it cannot be just one line. So sometimes literally they can only fit one line, but sometimes, you know, the paragraph is the box is a bit bigger. So they will have to write a bit more. But it's just, again, it's that quick for me to do, and it's helping the pupils know what is expected of them. Some further strategies for DIRT may include, like, for example, providing students with writing frames or scaffolds based on specific target codes, which allow them to rewrite all or part of their work. So request the students to rewrite their work, provide students with the opportunity to translate the feedback into a different context, which affords them to meet those targets. So for example, if you have told pupils to look at the accuracy in their use of adjectives, you can then give pupils a different task so you can see if they've understood the mistake that they've made the first time and if they are not doing that again. And targets are really important. And do your students know what they need to do to improve? Do you tell your students what is the next step in their journey to do even better? Then I want you to think about how often do you give them feedback, and how often do you give them targets? So it cannot be too often, because remember, when you give them a target, so it's something that it's going to take time for them to improve. So if it's too often, then they might not have given enough opportunities to show that they've met, you know, that target. And also thinking about how many targets do you give them? Because if you give them too many, they will probably not going to make progress in all of them. And start with the thing that is going to make the most difference. Because sometimes now you might be thinking, yeah, but I've got some pupils where it's just a disaster. You know, they're really struggling with everything. Well, start with one thing that's going to make a difference. And then when they tackle, when they can do that, move to the next, to the next part. So really, to summarize, feedback should be given when it will move a student on in the form that they can understand and act on. So feedback can take different forms. So it can be written, it can be, verbal, it can be in the lesson, it can be, following whiteboard activities. And we always give feedback in different ways, but feedback should be timely and relevant, because sometimes we also need to think about, so if the pupils have written a paragraph on, Monday the 13th of November, but they're only going to get that paragraph back marked the 30th of November, well, they will have forgotten about what they've written. So it's going to be very difficult for them to correct things and think about, because they can't even remember what they've written on that piece of work. So it's also thinking about when you are giving that feedback, is it timely and relevant? If you ask question part of your feedback, try to make sure that it will stimulate thinking and it will allow your students to make progress to the next level. Pupils should spend longer responding to your feedback that you spend giving it. So make sure that you plan the time in lessons or at home, for homework, for pupils to respond and make the improvements. Otherwise, you will have wasted, your marking time. And to me, what is very, very important is that after any type of feedback given, whether it's verbal, immediate, written, what is key is that we give opportunities for pupils later on to practice what they struggled with, so we can check if they have understood or if there are still some gaps in their learning, and ensuring that our students have ample opportunities to practice in an increasingly independent manner is really, really important. And only when a high standard of work can be repeated independently can we be confident that real learning has taken place. James Maxwell, in Making Every MFL Lesson Count, presents some reflective questions about feedback that are really worth considering. So the questions are as follows. Does your feedback help you and your students know whether or not they are secure with the key knowledge? Does your feedback encourage the students to think about how they could improve their work? Do you ensure that the students respond to the feedback you give them? Is the feedback you use manageable and sustainable? Do you use feedback to help you inform your planning? And if you use peer or self-feedback, how do you ensure that it does not compound misconceptions? So, I think those are very good questions to ask ourselves as practitioners, and just to think about, to reflect on our practice. If you want to do some more reading and learn more about effective ways of giving feedback, I highly recommend the following books. We've got Embedded Formative Assessment by Dylan Wiliam, who's the guru of formative assessment. The EEF have also produced the teacher feedback that I've shared at the beginning of this session. Michael Childs, who's a geography teacher, has written a book about feedback. You've got obviously Making Every Lesson Count, or Making Every MFL Lesson Count, that is specialized obviously in MFL, but loads of different resources that you can access. And if you are interested in knowing a bit more about feedback. So that was my session about feedback this afternoon. I can see that I've got a question in the chat. So Miriam is saying, do you use the students' names on Vocaroo? Is that data safe if it's stored online? Okay, so no. So the way it works on Vocaroo, you don't have any name of pupils, because it's they don't have to log into anything at all. It's just, you go on Vocaroo now on Google, you just type Vocaroo, it will take you to that website if you want, and you just press the red button and it sends a link. So I'm the only one knowing whose pupil it is. So you don't have to, you don't have to give the full name of the students at all. So you're safe, you're safe with that. If you've got any other questions, please, put them in the chat or in the Q&A. But otherwise, thank you very much, everyone, for coming to my session. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your afternoon. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, please get in touch, email me or message me on X, and I will send it to you. But thank you very much, everyone. Oh, I can see that I've got another question just coming up now. How do you share the vocabulary feedback with students if they cannot use their phones? Okay, so I make them make them listen to it for homework. So that might be their homework, and they just need then to either in their book just tell me will answer some of the questions that I might have asked. But yeah, in my school, we don't use, they're not allowed their phone as well. So it's either, they will do it for homework, or I will book a computer room. All our pupils they have to come to school with some headphones. So I might just borrow the laptops or the tablets, or book a computer room, and they might listen to it using that. So they are not using their phone at all. If you've got any other questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. But thank you, everyone.